Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Connor Moran. I am the director of the Wisconsin Book Festival, and I am delighted to welcome you to the 5th annual Cheryl Weston Memorial Lecture this evening. It is my distinct honor to be hosting Azar Nafisi for her latest book, Read Dangerously. Azar, welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you tonight.
Oh, good. Well, it's a pleasure to be here with you as well. I'm glad we were able to make this work. Thank you to everyone who is joining us at home. If there was ever a title that makes me think of Cheryl Weston, Read Dangerously is the one. And before I talk a little bit about Cheryl here at the beginning, I want to thank Madison Public Library, the Madison Public Library Foundation, and all of our sponsors. They've been unwavering in their support of free cultural events before the pandemic, throughout the pandemic, and now as we work our way back into this kind of, hybrid kind of environment that we have. So thank you to all of them. I want to mention here at the beginning that Cheryl Rosen Weston was a lawyer, an entrepreneur. She was a pioneer, and she was a law professor. She was my law professor. I studied with her numerous times during law school. I did independent studies with her. I took her constitutional law class, and she was just a force. She was also a long-standing sponsor of the book festival well before I took over this role. And in 2018, she left a bequest that provided the festival funds to grow in many, many ways. And one of those ways is the opportunity that we have tonight to provide everyone viewing tonight with a free copy of Read Dangerously. I will turn on the link at the bottom of your screen. Please just click that green button and sign up to get a free copy of Read Dangerously. It will be sent to you at your home, all courtesy of Cheryl. The last thing I want to say is that Cheryl was a stalwart believer in the library. She once said, "I believe this is the most important public institution in the city. The library is for everyone. This is the institution that is educational and social and cultural and free, and there's nothing else like it." So I just want to take a moment to thank Cheryl Weston for her support of the library, her estate, for their support of the book festival, and to thank Azar for being our 5th Cheryl Rosen Weston lecturer. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Azar, you are the multi-award-winning New York Times bestselling author of Reading Lolita in Tehran. Some of us may remember you from your 2015 visit to Madison for the Republic of Imagination. You are formerly a fellow at Johns Hopkins University's Foreign Policy Institute. You taught at Oxford, taught at several institutions in Tehran. Most notably the University of Tehran, the Free Islamic University, and Allama Tabatabai. Before you returned to the United States in 1997, you earned all of our respect and international recognition for advocating on behalf of Iran's intellectuals, youth, and especially young women. And in 1981, you were expelled from the University of Tehran for refusing to wear the mandatory Islamic veil, and you did not resume teaching until 1981. What an incredible story, and I just want to say thank you off the top for sharing it with us so many times in so many different ways. It's truly special.
Well, it's a pleasure. You know, stories are there to be shared. Otherwise, there won't be stories.
That's a great way to look at it.
Every single one of us have a story to tell. That is the great thing about it.
Yeah, that's right. Well, you begin this book, Read Dangerously, with a quote by Edwidge Danticat, and the quote is, "Create dangerously for people who read dangerously." You seem to have taken that sentiment to heart when writing this book. And how purposeful was that quote to how you put this book together?
I quote her at the end of Republic of Imagination.
Okay.
And the whole idea of reading dangerously came to me because I kept thinking that as a reader, we always, whenever we're talking about books or reading or writing, we're thinking about the writers.
Yeah.
And I was thinking that, what about the readers? I mean, there are billions
Thank you.
of
Thank you for thinking of us.
Yeah, and I was a reader before I was a writer,
Yeah.
And reading dangerously to me means that you open yourself to the world, you open yourself to the book, and do not impose your own preconceived notions on the book, which is what is being done these days. We all like the books to be not the way they're written, but the way we want them to be written. And the whole idea of writing and reading is discovering the unknown,
Yeah.
discovering other people,
Yeah.
connecting to other people. And it is all based on this idea of curiosity.
Yeah.
We as
Very much so.
human beings want to know. Science investigates the natural world. Literature and arts go into the psyche of us as human beings and try to understand through telling of the stories who we are, what is the meaning of life,
Yeah.
and connect us.
Yeah. And what have you been through, and what can I learn from that, and what have I bring to it as a reader? I think that that's
Yeah, I
so
mean,
important.
think if you had a kind of world where there would be no empathy, there would be no connection, we would be in perpetual war, a state of war.
True.
So stories are doing an amazing service to us as human beings. They help us survive. And I always, whenever I talk about curiosity, I remember Nabokov saying, curiosity is insubordination in its purest form. Because
That's great. There are great quotes tonight. That's another great one.
yeah, when you're curious, you don't know where you're gonna go.
That's right.
You have no idea. It's just
You're not
plain
following the rules.
desire for knowledge.
That's right. How do you? We all know that you're a great reader. So many of your books are about your personal relationship with books and with reading and with storytelling. But how do you balance being a reader with being a creator? Where do you find one kind of feeding into the other, and where do they kind of keep themselves separate?
Being a reader and being
And
what?
being a creator, being a writer.
Being a writer, creator. Ah, I don't know where one starts and the other ends. As I said at the beginning, I was a listener. I mean, I was
There you
very
go.
young, and my father would tell me stories at night. So I was a listener, and then became a reader, and then a writer. There are, in one way, both reading and writing have this in common. They are investigations.
Okay.
They, people think that when you write, you already know everything you want to write. That's not true.
Yeah,
You
no,
write
that's not
to
true.
learn. You write to discover. I discover so much when I write. That is like I discover so much when I read, but when I write, I also discover things about not just the world or the outside or the strangers, but things about myself that I didn't know.
Yeah.
And writing brings it up, brings it
Yeah.
out of. That is why writing is so difficult. That is why it takes so much
Yeah.
energy.
Yeah.
My husband the other day told me, if you're going to write another book, you're going to go into your office and not come out of it until you finish, because we can't just take it anymore.
Yeah, it takes it out of him. That's how much it is. I think it's also interesting you said you have to listen to yourself, right? You
Yeah.
started out as a listener, but when you write, you're listening to yourself as much as you're listening to anything else.
Yeah.
I think that's quite important. I'm going to jump and shift a little bit to the actual kind of the meat of the book a little bit. So much of your work, regardless of the book, focuses on your life in Iran. And for American readers, I know there's often kind of a voyeuristic, that's what things are like over there, or that's not what my life is like. But you bring the focus back to America in this book so many times, and one of the ways you do it is reminding us that we live in a culture that has perhaps too much ideology and not enough discourse. And you really try to explain to the American reader, like, things that it's not going super well. The civilization is on a very delicate edge of balancing. What was so important about writing this book now?
Well, was worried about the way things were going as early as reading Lolita. I ended that book. In the last chapter of that book, I asked a question that Saul Bellow posed, that those who survive the ordeal of Holocaust, how will they survive the ordeal of freedom? Because freedom is an ordeal.
Yeah.
And he also said that in totalitarian societies like Soviet Union, violence and death are obvious. You know, we know
Okay.
what they're. In democracies, of course, we don't kill people or torture them. Well,
In the same way.
I hope we don't.
Right.
But what is dangerous, what threatens, he said, the democracies is their sleeping consciousness and atrophy of feeling.
Yeah.
And I brought that in reading Lolita and ended it. And the beginning of Republic of Imagination was, in fact, the ending of reading Lolita. It was trying to respond to that question. Now, at the end of Republic of Imagination, I bring that quotation from Edge's Danticott, and I was not, you know, I felt that in America, a lot of people don't understand. When they listen to me talking about Iran, they say, oh my God, you know, how horrible, what can we do about it, you know, as if it could only happen somewhere else. While if you think it can't happen here, chances are that it has already happened. And that is how I
That's
felt
incredible.
with the Republic of Imagination. And then I started feeling really frustrated with the polarizations that had eliminated almost all discourse, you know, to the point where one segment of society can call the other segment an enemy of the people. This is a totalitarian statement. You hear it in Stalin's Soviet Union,
Sure.
that now we are getting used to this kind of discourse here in the United States of America. So when I felt that way, usually when I feel this frustrated and some thought comes to me and it doesn't leave, I write. And I begin by writing in my diary, and then it turns usually into a book. So that's what I did with this book.
Yeah.
But I started to write it in letters.
Yeah.
And so that is the difference between this book and the other ones, the previous ones.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, let's talk about the letters. The book is a collection of letters that you're writing to your father, who has passed, and they are, I guess, reminiscent of letters that you and he used to write to each other.
Yeah.
Correct. So I guess the first question I have is why letters? Like, why did it take that form for you?
At the beginning, it was my frustration, and I was just writing letters to anyone. I wrote letters to my father, but also to Donald Trump and Abraham Lincoln, and you know, all sorts of people, just airing my grievances. You know.
Okay.
But that, of course, wouldn't work for a book. It was too random. So then I decided to write letters to the writers whose books I was discussing. But that was too artificial. I mean,
Okay.
you know, I didn't know these people, and what could I tell them? Here is what you're saying in your book, you know, it just didn't work. And I wanted to write in letter form because I didn't want it to be straight essays. I wanted some sort of intimacy.
Yeah.
And,
That comes through for sure.
And so then I was talking to a friend about the book and my desire to write letters, and she said, why don't you write to a third person? And my father immediately came to my mind. the first letter he wrote to me, I couldn't even read and write. I was 4 years old. And in his diary, he wrote, I have it actually right on my desk, that diary, where he talks to me about his aspirations and the impact my birth had on him, and how he sees the future. And the first letter I wrote to him, I was 6 years old, and he was studying in America, actually in Washington, D.C. And I had just learned how to write, so I would write on scraps of paper a few 2 lines,
Sure.
and
But that's so
he would
special.
respond to me as if I was a grown up, you know. And throughout his life, we had these exchanges. We talked a lot, we had a lot of conversations, but we wrote to one another. That became a mode of connecting, which made it easy for me to write to my father, because I had done it
Yeah.
in real life.
I mean, I guess I also clearly you've thought about this a lot, but what is it about letters that makes them so powerful? I mean, writing a letter is powerful, receiving a letter is powerful. They evoke a special feeling. I have family that I write letters to, a certain amount of friends, and it transports you. You never know where it's going to go, and sometimes you just end up talking about something you didn't sit down to do, and I just marvel at the power of that.
Yeah, it is amazing. It is such an intimate act, and yet
that's a beautiful point.
you don't have to write about intimate things. You could be writing about a book you like, but I guess the best letters are the ones that come from the heart.
Sure.
And you just sit down and improvise, and things come to you. Sometimes you just want to talk to another person, and I'm so sorry about these notifications.
You're okay.
I tell you, I'm technologically challenged, and so I don't know how to turn this off.
We live in a virtual world. I would often start by saying everyone needs to turn off their cell phone, so it's okay. You keep
I'm
going.
going to turn off my cell phone right now. Of course, my computer has the notifications as well.
Sure. Well, on that note about letters, where did the act of writing letters take you that you didn't expect? What is in here that you didn't necessarily sit down to write to your father and ended up telling him about, or where did it make your mind go?
Well, for example, the books that I talk about, I had read them all before, except for one. Every other book I had read. But in writing about them, and in addressing my father about them, I discovered corners in those books that I had not noticed before. It was very strange. And on a more personal level, I sort of remembered a lot of things about the relationship with my father and with my family, which I brought into the book, because those moments were so interwoven with my writing that I couldn't leave them out. So that was a surprise, because I wasn't going to be talking about our personal life, but as I wrote, it came.
Yeah, it definitely comes through. I mean, memory, and you situate so many of the books with events that were going on in your life or going on in his life at the time, or I love how often you'll say something to him, directly addressing him and saying like, well, you couldn't know about this, and then you just explain it because he wasn't there for it, or he didn't get to read your writing when he was in Iran and you were in America, or things like that. I think it's so lovely and really does create that intimacy that you were talking about. I want to break in for 1 second and address the people watching at home. More than 200 people are watching at home, and there's actually a wonderful conversation going on in the chat about how lovely it is. So many of them wouldn't have been able to be at your lecture if we had been having this in person. And so I just want to say thank you for doing this virtually. And also I want to tell those people there will be time for you to ask Azar some questions. So please use the Ask a Question tab. It's right here at the bottom of the screen. And put your questions there, and we'll go to that in just about 20 minutes. But Azar, I want to go back to something you touched on just very briefly. That notion of kind of apathy that you were talking about, or that neglecting, taking part in the intellectual culture. You call out American culture. You say, in totalitarian regimes they actually like harass poets and torture poets and actively do things. And in America, we just take it for granted. We just kind of don't pay attention to our challenging literature, and whether that's because we think that it'll be there tomorrow, or we've always been able to express ourselves, so why wouldn't we be able to in the future? And you talk about the indifference mounting and how that really poses a threat to these types of ideas and discourse and all sorts of things. What can we do to combat this apathy? How do we go about preventing these freedoms and these ideas from going away?
Well, it is because we have become so complacent, and we want to be comfortable. I mean, I don't know how many times a week I hear this. People keep saying, I'm not comfortable with this. And they say it about books, the books that are being banned or taken out of classrooms, They say that it is disturbing. Well, I remind them of what one great writer said, James Baldwin. He said, artists are here to disturb the peace.
Yeah.
They're not here to add comfort. They're here to pose questions.
Yeah.
They're here to make us pose ourselves as question marks, that feeling that we don't want to be disturbed is so dangerous, especially today. I mean, look at how one by one our rights are being questioned. Every totalitarian mindset, their first targets are women, minorities, and culture. And all three of these are now under attack, not just in the Islamic Republic of Iran, but in the United States of America. And I'm by no means saying that America is the Islamic Republic.
Sure.
If it were, you and I would not be able to be
right. Yeah, right.
This, But what I'm trying to say is that there are totalitarian trends that we see.
Yeah.
And apathy will make it easy for totalitarian mindsets to take over. I remember this quote from Ray Bradbury, who said, "You don't have to burn books to destroy a culture. All you have to do is to have people not read books." I mean, we kill them by not reading them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is why I think especially young people should create these subversive book groups everywhere, especially in schools and at the universities. We, living in different communities, need to find ways of connecting to one another and bringing these questions which are not being asked, because there's so many lies going on that we don't have time to seriously and truthfully have a dialogue, to create dialogue, to create groups. That is one thing we can use social media for.
That would be a great reason, instead of the things that are in my Explore page.
Because social media so far has been used to isolate us rather
Right.
than create a connection between
Yeah.
us. But we can change the purpose. We can change it into connecting and into dialogue and discourse.
Yeah. Well, the subtitle of your book is The Subversive Power of Literature in Troubled Times. Um, I hope that you don't mind, but I'm gonna quote you back to you and then ask you a question about it. But right away, very early in the book, you say this: reading does not necessarily lead to direct political action, but it fosters a mindset that questions and doubts, that is not content with the establishment or the established. Fiction arouses our curiosity, and it is this curiosity, this restlessness, this desire to know that makes both writing and reading so dangerous. Um, which I mean, like, read that and I was like, okay, I'm just taken. I'm just in this book as a reader, and thank you for that quote. But what is it about that mindset? What is it about that curiosity that contains so much power? It's just that nugget of wanting to know more that is powerful. And as you've thought about it, what do you find?
It is so powerful that the most powerful men in the world, who have the whole military and weapons at their service, are scared enough to put our poets and writers all around the world in jail, harass them, torture them, and even kill them. If they were not dangerous, they would not be treated in this way. But there are two things inherent to fiction. I mean, not just to fiction, to literature and arts, to works of imagination and ideas. One is that literature is always in search of truth, and truth is dangerous. Look at it today. The extreme part of it, look at Putin. He is carrying this whole war on big lies, calling Zelensky and other Ukrainians Nazis, fascists,
Right, with no basis.
And in our own country, the most obvious example that comes to mind is the former president, and the big lie and all the smaller lies that he has been telling. The danger and the tragic aspect of it is not just that they tell these lies, it is that so many people believe them. So many people...
Or don't care to find out whether they're lies or not, right?
They
it's
don't
that apathy
care,
you're talking about.
because it takes effort.
It does, and it gets exhausting. The details get exhausting. This little thing can be a whole day's work trying to figure out if that's
I keep saying, if you don't want to be disturbed by a book, how are you going to be confronting the disturbances that life places on you? I mean, life is not all about comfort, and books prepare us for those moments of anguish and fear and loneliness that we experience in life. They prepare us, make us know how to confront them. But anyway, one reason that fiction is subversive and dangerous is because it talks truth. And truth is always dangerous, because once you know it, you can't be silent. Otherwise, you become complicit in even the crimes that are committed against you. So you can't remain silent. And another thing, especially about fiction, is that fiction structurally is democratic, because it is always about a group of characters with different voices, and a great writer allows every voice to speak, including the villain.
Yeah.
Because the purpose of fiction is not judgment, but understanding. And anyway, if you want to even defeat the villain, you have to know him, you have to understand him. So fiction goes under the skin of every single character. A bad writer is like a dictator. He wants to impose his voice and his message on the book. And that is cheating the readers rather than allowing them to experience the book and come to their own conclusions.
Mm-hmm.
He gives them what should be their
Yeah.
conclusions.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, I mean, thinking about my life as a reader, that happens so often, right? I give you this book and you say, oh, I didn't really relate to that person. And I sit here and I'm like, he was me. What are you talking about? And then you give me a book and you're like, well, this is me. And I'm like, well, I didn't, or we do find the same thing. We create that connection. But there's so much, you see so much of yourself. You learn so much about yourself. You learn so much about what you're not seeing in the
Yeah.
world and what you haven't experienced. I think that, I mean, there's so much power in that, the multiplicity of voices that you're talking about. I want to turn. I'm really going to try to have a no spoilers approach to the book, but I do want to kind of walk through the larger letters, if I could. The first letter is written at the end of 2019. I really do like how they kind of they span a long period of time, right? I think anyone who's written a letter knows that sometimes it happens in one sitting, and sometimes it's like four sittings, and that date you put on the beginning of it is completely, you've completely gone past it by the time you finish. But your first letter talks about you reading Salman Rushdie, reading Plato, reading Ray Bradbury, and in particular, I find you focusing on stories that pit governments and ideologies against writers and ideas. And the
Yeah.
resounding, repeating image that you come to is that while a regime can conquer people, they can topple kings, they ultimately are going to fail to defeat words and to defeat readers in the long run. It's the end of 2019. It feels, I mean, feels like a lifetime ago, but that's such a hopeful vision for what I think the world looked like at the end of 2019, and the uncertainty that we were facing then, which compared to the uncertainty we're facing now feels maybe smaller. But I love that you found so much hope in those books. And was that kind of what they helped you unlock at that time?
Well, I'm not exaggerating at all when I say that I literally survived through books. I mean, I don't know where I would have been or what I would have done had it not been for books. For me, uh, I can't understand people who don't feel the same way.
Agreed. I agree.
I mean, I love the feel of the books. I love to touch it's a very sensual experience reading a book.
Hmm.
Uh, no Kindle can ap- approach the sensual feeling when you hold the book in your hands
Hmm.
and turn the pages and feel the texture.
Yeah.
Um,
There's a book
of
that you talk about specifically, and as I was reading it, I really would love if you could kind of take me to the moment of holding a specific book in your hand. You talk about a friend of yours or a friend of the family who brought a copy of the Satanic Verses to Iran from England during the Ayatollah and the fatwa and all of it, and about you reading it at that time. And uh, what did that feel like for you, and how could you have handled like that much subversion just in the holding of it? I mean, what was that like?
in the holding of satanic
Yeah, or
verses.
just, and holding it and reading it, and knowing what you were kind of
It,
doing
you
by
know,
reading a book.
it brought me profound sadness that a book that is magical and playful
Yeah.
Rushdie loves words, and the way he treats them is really, and it is not a book against any religion, including
No.
Islam. It is about migration. It's about our fractured world. It is actually a critique of the West.
Yeah.
Uh,
It is. You're
iron,
right. You're very right about that.
Ironically, it's a critique of the West, and yet millions of people now would be deprived of reading the book because of this whole um, controversy around it, you know. So on one hand, uh, I had a friend, and my father would also sometimes say something similar to that, who used to say, God exists because Shakespeare does. Um, Meaning that Shakespeare is miraculous, can create miracles. And that is what a great book is. So I felt sad, but I also felt joyous that someone was so much in love with words. Someone could,
Yeah.
I always imagine him like playing like bubbles. You know, the
Yeah.
words are like bubbles that he creates all over the place.
Yeah, yeah. I think that that captures a lot of it. Your second letter deals with that interregnum period, post-election, pre-inauguration at the end of 2020. Um, I think some a period of time where things felt perhaps their most kind of untethered,
Yeah.
and not knowing what was going to happen minute to minute. You turned to Zora Neale Hurston and Toni Morrison, and you remark upon how these stories are stories of oppression, but they are equally stories of creating heroes and heroines out of marginalized people. They're stories of revenge, but they're stories of empathy. And to go back to what you were saying earlier, they are stories about finding a story of everyone in the story of an individual. Um, that feels eerily like you found exactly the books to reflect that specific period of time, those 8 weeks. I mean, so many of the things that you call out in those stories feels like that's all I talked about with people and all I felt as I was reading the news. How did you kind of see those connections being made?
The connections between the times and the
Yeah,
book.
just well, and just seeing those, seeing the stories of oppression, but then seeing that in those stories of oppression we're finding heroes and marginalized people, or seeing the stories of revenge and seeing stories of empathy at the same time, the duality of
That
them.
that is the whole thing that you mentioned about having hope at a time of despair.
Yeah.
But there is always, I mean, the fact of writing is a hopeful uh, act.
Yeah.
And there's the hope that someone somewhere will be reading you and empathizing with you,
Mm-hmm.
and you are not alone. So that there is always in many books like Zora Neale Hurston's, both Toni Morrison and Zora Neale Hurston's book, um, uh, this seeming discrepancy between a very bitter subject matter and
Mm-hmm.
theme
Okay.
and a very beautiful writing. Like, for example, Toni Morrison's Blue Eyes, the protagonist is so oppressed, is so bent by
I feel like I
the
planted these
position
here.
she's. Oh,
They're
you
all on my
have them
shelf. They're
all.
all on my shelf. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
That is great.
Yeah.
And she is so deprived
Yeah.
that she believes the only way she can be beautiful is to become like her enemy,
Right.
to have blue eyes. And yet the language of that book is so poetic. And what Morrison does, she says that, okay, Pecola, the protagonist,
Mm-hmm.
uh, is miserable. She's raped by her father. She has, but there is a poetry within her, and the language that Morrison uses brings
Mm-hmm.
out the poetry of Pecola.
Yeah.
So what we enjoy is that poetry and knowing that there is always going to be poetry. Uh, you mentioned at the end of the first chapter, I talk about how literature always wins
Mm-hmm.
between. I mentioned at the end the fact that after the revolution, well, in Iran, I don't know why we don't have it in the States, but in Iran, the name of many streets and are after our poets. And we have statues of our poets in our cities. Poetry is our real identity, what connects us to our past. And so after the revolution, this new regime brought down all the statues of the Shah and
Mm-hmm.
his family and changed the names of the streets. Then they wanted to do the same with the poets because the poets were agnostics, they were
Right.
anti what,
Sure.
and they were going to bring down the statue of our epic poet Ferdowsi, who had lived 1,000 years ago, and change the name of the street after Omar Khayyam, the agnostic Persian poet and astrologer. They couldn't do it. People would not let them do it. And today they have retreated. The regime has retreated. So I thought, my God, they could bring down the king, but they couldn't touch the
Can't
poet.
touch the poet. That's beautiful. I'm running out of time before we go to audience questions, so I'm going to skip ahead. I just have a couple more things that I'd like to ask you, and then we'll go to the audience. Your fourth letter is May 2020. It's basically kind of right as we decided, okay, the pandemic's like, it's here and it's
Yeah.
going to be a long time. And you turned to Margaret Atwood. I, this is definitely not the Margaret Atwood of The Blind Assassin or Alias Grace. It is
Mm.
also not the Margaret Atwood of Oryx and Crake and End of the World, which could have easily gone that way as well. But it's the world of The Handmaid's Tale and the Testaments, and you grew up in a theocracy, and I'm really wondering what struck you about how familiar The Handmaid's Tale felt, or maybe even feels, in modern America. Why does it feel like what are the qualities of it that make it feel so relatable, even 30 years after, 40 years after it's written?
Well, the trends you see in America, I hope, we as Americans have a choice. We can give in to these trends, and America then will become another Handmaid's Tale, another theocracy. Because you notice the attacks on women and on
Mm-hmm.
uh, gays and transgender and all of
Yeah.
that, they come with a sort of religious taste to it. They
Mm-hmm.
have, and either we stand up and not allow these things to happen,
Mm-hmm.
or we will go the way of uh, any totalitarian society. We forget that the two worst movements in 20th century uh, did not come from the East, did not come from Iran or any other. They came from the heart of civilization, of European civilization, fascism and communism. And if you read about it, you notice how many people during the times of the fascists wouldn't believe that the country would go that way.
Yeah.
That
Right.
is the whole thing. They thought they were Jewish people who would not
Sure.
believe that the country would go the way that
Right.
it went.
Right.
So what I'm saying is that I don't want to create panic.
Yeah.
We have great democratic institutions, but we have to do something to keep those institutions. And
Yeah.
that is why we need to communicate and not be so isolated from one another.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. So in the an effort to communicate, I'm gonna kind of cede the floor. We have some just absolutely wonderful questions, and I'm gonna ask you those. And to the people watching at home, there's still some time if you want to put your question in the Ask a Question section. Please do so. There's also still time to get your free copy of Read Dangerously. So please, as you're watching, click the green button below the screen, and please just claim it. It's completely free. We'll send it to your house, and you can read it, pass it along. Really engage with some wonderful thought here. So Azar, Natalie White asks, what advice do you have for high school teachers who are facing school boards and community members who are concerned about controversial literature in the classroom?
God, my heart goes to the teachers.
Yeah.
I mean, I have talked and written about it. It is not just everything that is being done about education in this country is the wrong thing right now. And
I'm sorry to laugh. It's just, yeah, that's a lot.
I tell you, I think that the first step is to try to get the communities, try to get the public to understand that the way we're going will not create the kind of citizens who are independent-minded, who can survive in the kind of world that we live in. I know that teachers have, I don't know.
Superpowers?
I mean, the only thing I can think of is creating groups that will address the issues and try to, if you ban a book, come and tell us why you ban a book and we respond to you. There has to be some sort of a conversation. I'm so sorry that I cannot respond the way I need to and the way I want.
I mean, I think it's a difficult question, and I think having conversation is very important in that context, for sure. All right, now our next one is from Mitch Hampton. Mitch asks, because you were at the Foreign Policy Institute at Johns Hopkins, can you think of moments where people, students, or faculty looked to literature to see statecraft or foreign policy in a new or different way?
Did they look at it that way?
Yeah, where they used literature to see statecraft in a new or different way.
Well, I tell you, Mitch, hi, by the way. Not the way that I would have done it.
Okay. And how was that way?
Well, actually, I'm very grateful to Johns Hopkins SAIS. For 20 years almost, they gave me the freedom to create programs there about cultural conversations, and no one told me that I was useless, that, because this is being said at universities that literature and humanities are useless. We don't need them. But I did not see so much of it being implemented as policy.
Okay.
I did not see that. But SAIS created a great atmosphere at the Foreign Policy Institute where literature was taught and respected.
Good. As long as you didn't answer John le Carré, I think we're in a better place than I thought we might be.
Yes, le Carré is amazing.
There you go.
Smiley ones.
Yes, all Smiley's people. Next, Carla Mullen asks, are there particular books that aroused your curiosity, and are there particular books that caused you discomfort? Either for this book, reading for this book, or just generally, what are those books?
they're the kind of books that do both to me.
Great.
Because um, but they disturb, when the ones that where they disturb in a good way,
Okay.
because I discover something about myself, for example, which I don't like, but it's good to know.
Mm-hmm.
It's good to know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah,
So,
that's great. What is an example of one that what helps you discover that?
yeah, and the curiosity takes you there.
Yeah. Do you have a title or just just books?
Well, uh, any book that I love, uh, from the first story in 1001 Nights,
Okay.
Shahrazad's 1001
Yeah.
Nights, to the present.
Okay. All right. Well, that's great. All right. Next, we have April Schultz says, "What subversive young adult books do you recommend for children and teens?"
What subversive young adult
Young
books?
adult books. Are there titles that you recommend that young people read to kind of start them on this path?
Well, when I was young, it was so different. Like, for
There were
example,
just books. There wasn't young
I
adult.
just read books, and
Yeah.
from Treasure Island
Uh-huh.
to Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice.
Mm-hmm.
Those, and you know, I was 15, but I was reading Balzac's books,
Mm-hmm.
and so I recommend that young people should read everything.
That's great. I will put in a shameless plug here for the book festival April um, on May 25th. We're hosting a book called Just Your Local Bisexual Disaster. The author's name is Andrea Mosqueda, and it's about a young woman in Texas who's going through a sexual revolution, but also the same kind of personal revolution and rebellions that you go through in teen years. It's a book that asks a ton of questions. That event will be broadcast on Crowdcast, and I highly recommend. If you have a teen, we're giving that book away for free, so they can watch the event. They can get the book sent to them. So that's my plug for future book festival events.
And talking
On
of
that theme.
children and young adults,
Mm-hmm.
all books by Peter Sis.
Peter
He's an
Cease, yeah,
amazing illustrator
yeah,
and writer.
yeah,
He's beautiful.
yeah. He makes
Beautiful.
you think differently. Just the way that he like what you might think of in your head and what he has on the page are almost never the same, and
Yeah,
it just pushes you
yeah.
in different directions. Yeah, that's a great one. Sorry, Susanna Hermano asks, how do you suggest then for writers who are under threat, whether they're minorities, people of color, First Nations, religious threat, diversity, LGBTQ plus, ableist women, to write dangerously? What is your advice about how to write dangerously, and more so, how do you get published so that you can be read and create, as you said?
Well, how to get published is another matter, because
Sure.
I'm not sure. Um, I can. The only good thing maybe is that now, if publishers don't publish us, we could always go and publish ourselves
Sure.
online. Um, uh, the first part of the question was,
The first part of the question is what advice do you have for
for
people
the
to start
writers
to
to
write
write
dangerously?
dangerously.
Yeah.
I believe that truthful writing is writing dangerously.
Great.
You know, and as a writer, you discover yourself, and not all that you discover you like, you know.
That's right. That's
So all writing is both writing dangerously and liberating.
excellent. Yeah. Yeah.
I feel, I mean, nothing gives me so much joy and anguish simultaneously as writing does.
That's excellent. Yeah, and I think really like the piece that you were talking about before, the listen to yourself and say the things that happen inside you. I think that really, for me, is one of those things when I'm reading and I see somebody who's really kind of bearing their soul or really putting themselves out there. That's the stuff that feels dangerous to me. That's the stuff that feels truly deeply creative, because it is truly letting me see into someone else's existence.
And you need to use the language of the heart.
Okay.
That is much more difficult than one thinks,
Yeah,
to know
for
your
sure.
true feelings. And I'm sure that you're also a reader. So as a reader, you know that readers don't like to be cheated. So
That's true. Yeah.
write from the heart and write with passion. And it will be published one way or another, you know.
There you go.
You need to persevere.
Yeah.
You
Right.
need not to think that of the obstacles in front of us, but how to surmount those obstacles through writing, through doing what we want to do,
That's right.
what we're passionate about.
That's great. Well, Susanna says thank you in the chat. And one last question from the audience here as we wrap up. With so much money devoted to STEM education, how do teachers keep literature and the humanities in focus in their classrooms? This is from Janelle.
Well, I think STEM should be abolished.
You heard it here first, everyone. Abolish STEM.
I think that we need a real radical fundamental change in our system of education. It is not that STEM comes and then Common Core come. I mean, you know, these things come and go. But the whole idea is that we need the mindset that understands without humanities and liberal arts, you don't have a democracy. The difference between China and the United States is not in engineering or technology or even science. It is in the fact that they cannot afford to have liberal art colleges. Ayatollah Khomeini, the leader of the Islamic Revolution, called the universities more dangerous than bombs.
Yeah.
The first place they wanted to close down was the humanities. They didn't go after engineering. They went after humanity.
Right.
You know, so if we have this illusion that we can have a democratic country without humanities and liberal arts, it is a big illusion, and it is going to have its repercussions.
Yeah, I think that's really great. I also think I get into a lot of conversations about humanities, and you know, as someone who got an English degree and gets to use it for their job, I feel very, you know, and the humanities are very near and dear to my heart. But it's about the word human in there, right?
Yeah.
The humanities are about teaching you to be human. They're teaching you about other humans. They're teaching you about what our entire kind of social construct is about, and whether that's, you know, learning a different language or learning, you know, about literature or learning about the history of art or something like that. Those things are important, and they're just as important as, you know, learning engineering. We also need, you know, we need roads and we need bridges and we need, you know, airplanes and also, and the technology to put this event on virtually. Those things are triumphs as well, but we can't have one without the other.
I just wanted to say, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I really, really disagree with those who pit science and technology against humanities and liberal arts.
Yeah, me too.
Science and technology have a lot in common with liberal arts and humanities. They too are based on curiosity.
That's
and
absolutely right. Where would we be? If we didn't have curious scientists, we wouldn't have any number of things.
But think of Einstein, who felt that imagination was even more important than science because imagination encircles the world. And he was a musician. He played the violin.
Yeah. Well, and, I mean, how can you come up with theories like that if you're not imagining what might be possible,
Yeah, yeah.
right? That's it's so much of science begins with imagination. Um, Thank you so much, Azar, and to everyone watching at home. I really appreciate you all tuning in. I want to end where you end. Your conclusion is very beautiful. It is also very brief, one page, just like very tight, couple of lines. But the final, second to last paragraph, you write.
Yeah.
Readers, of course, have no formal organization to promote truth, to bring about change, but they number in the billions. Readers range across the spectrums of profession, background, gender, race, ethnicity, religious affiliation. Collectively, their power would be immense. Every bookstore, library, museum, or theater that closes, every book that is censored or removed from schools and libraries, every art, music, or literature program canceled in our schools and other institutions, these should all remind us of our responsibility. And I think that captures so much the not only the individuality of being a reader, but the collectivity of what we're going through as human beings. And I want to end on one note, which is, how can we best shepherd this responsibility? What do you see as the way forward for people who actively are engaged in this and want to protect those freedoms and wield this power?
You want me to answer that?
No.
No.
I was hoping you might, but maybe there's no answer yet.
Going forward, yeah, you're right. I mean, I believe that once we start the process, the way forward shows itself to us.
Okay.
We have to take some action.
Sure.
And by action, I don't mean coming into the streets and protesting,
Right.
although we need to do that as well. But trying to converse with other people about how do we, and how do we link all these different movements, like what is going on with women, what is going on with minorities, with what is going on with books.
Mm-hmm.
To understand that supporting anything that has to do with freedom is supporting freedom itself. It doesn't have to be because I'm a writer, I only support writers, or because I'm a woman, I only support women.
Right.
I support anyone who needs, who believes in human rights.
Yeah.
No matter whether they're women or not.
Yeah. I think conversations like tonight are important. I think people tuning in, 250 people tuning in across the country, is important. I think all of us reading this book, I think sharing this book, sharing these ideas, not being afraid to talk about them as well, right? I think, so often, it might be easier to talk about a sports score or a show that people are watching, and I think talking about these ideas and talking about protecting our freedom leads to people thinking that they need to do it, and I hope that we can do that. And Azar, I want to thank you from my heart and from Cheryl Weston. This is exactly the kind of thought and book and evening that she really cherished, and the reason she made this gift. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you. And by the way, book festivals are great places for this kind of debate.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. I love book events. I could do a whole 20 minutes just about how special book events are, and how much time we spend with books and how much more time we need to spend with authors. I want to thank you. I want to thank everyone watching at home. If you are in Madison, we have another event coming up with Kwame Onwuachi, who is a Top Chef alumni and has his first cookbook coming out. That is at Madison Public Library on Monday, May 23rd. We will also be hosting James Patterson for his autobiography in June. You can check our website, wisconsinbookfestival.org, for that. The recording of this event will go up right after we're done, so please share it with somebody who wasn't able to watch it tonight. I was so delighted. I have 3 or 4 people that I know weren't here and need to watch this. Azar Nafisi, it is always a pleasure. I really appreciate you being here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for a great conversation. Thank you.
You too.